So let's talk about photorespiration. This is another process that happens sometimes in bad situations. So this is when the plant doesn't have enough CO2. When would this ever happen? Well, if you took a plant that is used to living in the tropical rainforest and you put it in the Arizona desert, these stomata that we talked about, the opening that allows gases to come in, is sensitive to water. It actually balloons open when there's lots of water present, and it slams shut when there's no water present. So if the plant is deprived of water or is in a dry environment when it shouldn't be, its stomata won't open. Effectively, it's holding its breath. And so when that happens, the CO2 can't get in to the cell. And so what happens is, as the light reactions are occurring over here, remember one of the products of the light reactions is oxygen that's coming out of the light reactions, and usually it's being breathed off by the plant. But if we have no CO2 coming in and only oxygen available, then this enzyme right here that we labeled as Rubisco, it cannot tell the difference between oxygen and CO2. So if it takes in oxygen instead of CO2, then you don't get any sugars out of the end, and we're just wasting it, spinning its wheels, it's wasting its ATP and its NADPH, but it's not making anything. And that is called photorespiration, and it will kill the plant. So there's a couple options to overcome this that we'll talk about. So there's two ways to overcome photorespiration that have evolved over time. One way is what we call a physical separation. Okay, so we've got the Calvin cycle happening down here. We have our good friend Rubisco that's taking in carbon dioxide, but we don't allow him outside access to the air. Okay, so there's a separate set of cells that are outside of the cells where the Calvin cycle is, and they bring in CO2 when it's available, right? So they'll bring in CO2, and they'll store it as these 4 carbon sugars. And then when Rubisco needs it, they'll feed it to him one at a time. It's the equivalent of putting Rubisco in a playpen and then chucking Cheerios at him when he needs to eat. So we don't allow Rubisco any access to the outside air. This is called a C4 plant. The normal plant that we talked about before is called a C3 plant. So this is C4, and you'll see this in things like corn and sugarcane. The other way that we can get around it is by temporal separation, so by time. And so in this case, it's the same idea where we run the Calvin cycle with Rubisco, but we only run this in the daytime and we only breathe at night. So when it's cool, the plant will breathe and will bring in as much CO2 as possible, build these 4 carbon sugars, and then in the daytime when it has to close its stomata, it can feed Rubisco because it built it up during the night. These are called CAM plants, C-A-M, for crucilation acid metabolism, which you don't need to know. CAM plants, and this is things like cacti. Any succulents are going to be a CAM plant, pineapple, things like that. So those are 2 ways that we've gotten around photorespiration. One is a physical separation, one is a temporal separation.